Right, so the Premier League season has concluded, and what a season it was. But if you cast your mind back to the start of the season, I created my first ever Premier League predictions video where I predicted what I thought the table would look like come the end of the season. And as the season has just finished, I think it's the perfect time to take a look back on that table and to see how I did. Not actually too bad, to be fair, to say this was my first attempt. So I'm going to go through the table from 20th to 1st, just like I did in the previous video. I'm just going to see how those teams placed and if they placed where I thought they did. I'm going to start off with 20th place. I had Bournemouth, but they actually finished in 15th. And it looks like I owe the Cherries an apology. Like everybody, I wrote them off, but they pleasantly surprised and managed to comfortably survive in the league while playing some pretty decent football at times. While they didn't do loads of summer business, they built on the solid squad that took them up, and also did some smart business in the winter window to just add to that side. I think the best move they did was sacking Parker in August though, and appointing Gary O'Neill. And while he did have a few up and down moments in the season, he kept them up, and he kept them up quite comfortably as well, so fair play. I think a lot of people wrote them off, so yeah, fair play for surviving. They deserve it, really. They played some good football. And then in 19th place, I had Leeds, and they actually finished 19th. I nailed this one. Leeds, when looking at their summer window, they actually did some very decent business, bringing some really good players that looked like would do well in the Premier League. But it was a managerial mess that co-signed Leeds to a season of struggle. They definitely felt the loss of Phillips and Rafinha, but players like Rodrigo stepped up, but still couldn't save Leeds. But as I mentioned, it was that managerial carousel that really rocked Leeds this season and sort of stalled any progress they could have made. They started the season under Jesse Marsch, but despite backing him in the summer window, he could not get the results needed, could not get them playing good football, and ultimately they had to sack him in a bid to save their season. The multiple different styles of the various managers they brought in did not help things, and Leeds ultimately went out with a whimper. I mean, their last managerial appointment was Big Sam Allardyce, and even he couldn't save Leeds. But they played a very different style under him to how they played under Marsch and the other bloke whose name I forgot. But yeah, it was just it wasn't good for Leeds. I think a lot of people expected them to go down, especially after last season as well. And yeah, I can't see them coming straight back up either. A little spoiler alert for my championship prediction, but I don't see Leeds coming straight back up. Kind of like Norwich and Watford, really. And then we move on to 18th place, and I put Fulham, and they actually finished 10th. So fair play to Fulham as well, you know. They shook off the yoke of being a yo-yo club by playing some very impressive football. They stuck by Marco Silva throughout the season, doing some very decent recruitment, you know, strengthening a already strong side. You know, they breezed through the Championship, and while there are, you know, different levels to the Championship and the Premier League, they played very well this season, and brilliant recruitment from them, to be honest. Mitrovic made the step up this season and was a huge part of the Cottagers' quite successful season. I'd say successful by their standards, definitely, you know, top 10 finish. It was also the Brazilians, Willian and Vinicius, who also played their parts very well, both chipping with 5 goals, with Willian grabbing 5 assists and Vinicius grabbing 2. You know, fair play for them. They played some good football this season. I mean, they played their first match against Liverpool at Craven Cottage, and after grabbing that draw, I think everyone's like, okay, maybe Fulham aren't going to get relegated. And honestly, you know, they deserve it, you know. They did play some good football this season. Then we move on to 17th, and I had Southampton, who actually finished 20th. When making this list, it was a major toss-up for me whether Southampton would stay up or go down. And in my initial draft of this list, I actually had put them in the drop zone, so maybe I should have stuck by that. But yeah, Southampton had an awful season. I don't think anyone needs to say that, really. Just look at them. They were terrible. They sacked Hasenhüttl in November and decided to bring in Nathan Jones, which probably goes for the strangest appointment of the season. Maybe one of the strangest appointments of the Premier League as a whole, because he was dreadful. Like, he's only ever performed with Luton, so I don't know why they thought he'd be able to manage Premier League Southampton, but here we are. But he was dreadful and definitely contributed to this poor season from the Saints. Ruben Selles then took over and, to be fair, did slightly improve the Southampton side, but it was a Herculean task to keep them up, and ultimately the squad and him were not up to it. They did decent business over the season, but it just wasn't enough to keep the Saints up. You know, they brought in players like Joe Aribo, who I thought was going to be brilliant for Southampton, didn't really get much game time and couldn't really show his skill that I thought he had, so yeah, maybe that wasn't the best signing in retrospect. And, you know, they brought in a multitude of good players, but yeah, it just wasn't to be for Southampton. Then we went on to 16th place, and I had Brentford, who actually finished 9th. Brentford did much better than I expected. It was a very good season for the Bees, to be honest, as it saw them climb up the table from last season, as they managed to breach the top half of the league. very good job. They did decent business in the window, as is to be expected of them, really. Their data-driven recruitment has done bits for them since coming up from the Championship, even in the Championship, to be honest. And they managed to fill the Ericsson gap wonderfully. Ivan Toney was their top scorer once again and was one of their outstanding players, finishing 3rd in top scoring rankings for the season, which is very impressive, especially in this Brentford side. Yeah, very well done to the Bees, exceeded my expectations and probably a lot of other people's expectations, but you're cementing yourself as a Premier League side, and honestly, you deserve it from the performances and the recruitment you've done, so yeah, fair play. And then in 15th place, I had Nottingham Forest, and we actually finished in 16th. 30 signings, who gives a fuck? Nottingham Forest are staying up. And we fucking did. Let's go! Yes! Now, while my prediction wasn't exact, I wasn't far off. Forest were always going to have an uphill battle with the amount of players they had to bring in, and while we did survive nonetheless, it was a real battle, but we had to. We stuck by Cooper, which I think was the right decision, as we reaped the rewards with the squad coming together and performing well coming into the tail end of the season. I think the Liverpool away match was really like the hallmark of, yeah, we're staying up, we can compete, let's do it. We're in a very good position to kick off next season, but yeah, I thought we'd stay up, and we did. Always held the faith. Come on, you Reds. And in 14th place, I actually had Everton, who finished in 17th. It was another not great season for Everton, as they found themselves fighting relegation, yet again. They dropped Frank Lampard after very poor performances and brought in Sean Dyche, but still, it was not an easy fight for Everton. And this level of performance is not sustainable. They really need to change something, or they could definitely see themselves getting relegated next season. I think there's a rumoured point deduction as well, so the Toffees need to change something, and they need to change something quickly. They were definitely missing Richarlison, as while McNeil was their top goal scorer, he did not hit the numbers Richarlison did, and they definitely missed those goals. I think they're the lowest scoring side in the league this season, which is mad. They did have some good moments, but I definitely overestimated them, and yeah, it's not looking good for the Toffees. So I'm editing this video, and I somehow forgot to record my bit about Wolves. So in 13th place, I had Wolverhampton Wanderers, and they actually finished in 13th. So that was another one I nailed, and I was right in saying that I don't think they'll perform well this season. They started the season with Large in charge, before bringing in Lopetegui, after a not so great run of results under Large. Things did not pick up immediately, but they had a steady rise in form which saw them secure another season in the Premier League. Their business in the window was decent, but some players did not reach their expectations when signed. Fairly happy with that prediction though, and thank you for Morgan Gibbs-White. He is fucking phenomenal. And in 12th place I had Leicester City, who actually finished in 18th. Yeah, it looks like I drastically overestimated Leicester, huh? After 9 years in the Premier League, Leicester saw themselves relegated in what has been an awful season for the East Midlands outfit. After some terrible form, Brendan Rodgers got the sack in April, probably too late to be honest, and they brought in Dean Smith, but that didn't help things either. The players didn't really look up for it either, and despite being West Ham on the final day of the season, they could not stay up. They were very inactive in the summer window, and it definitely didn't help things, and despite some winter additions, they could not save their season. Yeah, I think the damage was done under Brendan Rodgers, and Dean Smith was handed a sinking ship and expected to do not the impossible, but a very, very tough task, and ultimately he couldn't. And you can't really say it's his fault, because Leicester do have good players. Like, their squad should have been too good to go down, and while no squad is too good to go down, they still have a very good squad. So these performances were not acceptable, and obviously saw them relegated in the end. But hey, the East Midlands is red. And then move on to 11th place, where I had Aston Villa, who actually finished in 7th. You know, I really thought Gerrard would be the man for Villa, but boy was I wrong. I thought that a full pre-season under Gerrard would be good for his side. Never again. Gerrard was sacked after poor league performances, and they brought in Unai Emery, and that was a masterstroke, as Emery transformed the club's fortunes and took the Birmingham outfit to the Europa Conference League. Signing Coutinho permanently was not the greatest move, as he couldn't stay fit and was generally quite underwhelming this season. Yeah, I don't know why they signed him permanently, like at his age, while he did perform last season. Yeah, it was a big gamble, and they spent a lot of money on someone who was ultimately a flop in my opinion. But Emery took a decent side and made them far, far better. They should not have been playing at the level they were under Gerrard. Emery showed how good that side could be, and fair play, man. I think if Villa had Emery from the start, they could have been challenging for Champions League football, maybe. Definitely Europa League, but yeah, very, very underwhelming from Gerrard. And Emery, brilliant appointment. And then in 10th place, I had Crystal Palace, who actually finished in 11th. I wasn't far off with Palace, to be fair. It wasn't to be with Vieira, and despite being 12th for most of the season, Palace were struggling to win matches, so Vieira parted company with the Eagles and Roy Hodgson was brought in. And he transformed their fortunes, getting that side scoring loads of goals and just playing some very attractive attacking football. Palace were a good side towards the end of the season with players like Eze and Olise coming to a really good run of form. They managed to keep hold of Zaha and Guehi, as I highlighted in my first video, and despite Zaha not being his best, they both played well and, contributed to Palace ultimately, finishing in the mid-table. It was a better finish than their last season too, which is always a bonus. I think a lot of people thought they were going to kick on under Vieira, but unfortunately didn't really work out for him. But be interested to see what they do in the summer, because they might keep Roy, they might appoint a new manager, who knows. But yeah, very, very decent season from Palace in my opinion, and very close to my prediction, which is what matters. And then we move on to 9th, and I had Brighton and Hove Albion, who actually finished in 6th. Brighton were really impressive this season, they did their usual brilliant summer business, unearthing some great talents that are set to go for some big money in the summer. And even despite losing Graham Potter to Chelsea, Brighton acted quickly and brought in De Zerbi, who continued the Seagulls' brilliant success, had them playing some very attractive attacking football. I think De Zerbi was probably the appointment of the season, if we're being honest. He's one of the new managers that performed well despite being brought in midway through the season. So, And his debut in the league as well, with that 3-3 draw with Liverpool, will always be in my memory, as that was a brilliant game. They finished in the top 6 and secured themselves a very much deserved Europa League spot. I'm going to enjoy seeing Brighton in Europe, to be honest. Now, while Undav didn't perform as expected when he was first brought back from Union Saint-Gilloise, I just think he was getting used to the league, to be honest. I can see him kicking off next season. He started scoring in towards the end of the season. I think he'll be able to carry that into next season. But yeah, extremely well done from Brighton. Brilliant performance, brilliant club, class. Then in 8th place I had West Ham United, who actually finished in 14th. I thought West Ham could continue the run they had last season, in which they finished 7th, but it was not to be. They did good business in the windows and do currently find themselves in the Europa Conference League final, to be fair. So while they haven't qualified for Europe that way, they could if they win the finals. There were multiple times in the season where it looked like David Moyes would get the sack, but the board backed him and they actually managed to avoid relegation. I think in the end, sticking by Moyes was the best decision. Now they could let go of him in the summer and that remains to be seen, but overall it worked out in the end for all parties involved, I think. So yeah, fair play to West Ham. Sticking by Moyes, a lot of clubs would have sacked him, to be fair. So yeah, it wasn't the best season for West Ham, but fairly decent, I think, especially with Conference League finals still to play. And then in 7th, I had Newcastle United, who actually finished in 4th. Okay, Newcastle, I see you. Now, while I did expect Newcastle to qualify for Europe, I did not expect it to be Champions League football. The signings they brought in were brilliant and elevated an already decent side into a top 4 challenger, which I did not expect. This was Newcastle's first full season under Eddie Howe and they played brilliantly, securing a top 4 finish and a coveted Champions League spot. Fair play. They did this without spending loads of money, despite their huge takeover they got. They haven't spent a lot. They've spent quite sensibly in my opinion, which is to be applauded really. Signings like Isaac and Pope were great moves, and combined with the form of players like Almiron and Wilson really helped propel the Geordies up the table. And honestly, I thought the Geordies deserved Champions League football. But yeah, I'm happy for them. They played brilliantly this season and did far better than expected, so can't really be complaining if you're a Newcastle United fan. And then in 6th place I had Manchester United, who actually finished in 3rd. And Ten Hag's first season in charge of United, and they performed better than expected. I didn't expect him to return them to Champions League football like he did. It's very impressive, especially considering their start to the season where they lost 4-1 to Brentford or something. It was a very shaky start under Ten Hag, but he steadied the ship and secured Champions League football for them, and an EFL Cup, and they're in the FA Cup finals as well, so they could win 2 trophies this season. Crazy. Ronaldo parted company with the club and United performances started to improve, so there might be a little correlation there, but really he wasn't suited to the Ten Hag way of playing, to be fair, so I think it's best that he left. Rashford had a brilliant season, which you love to see, and despite not landing top target De Jong, the players they brought in worked really well and improved this side quite a bit, to be fair. Ten Hag turned around United's fortunes and despite some shocking results has done a very good job with the side. I think a couple more signings in the coming window and yeah, United will be very, very solid. And then in 5th place I had Chelsea, who finished in 12th. Now I did say that I couldn't see Chelsea retaining top 4 football, and I was correct. I didn't expect them to have such a bad season. Now don't get me wrong, as a Forest fan I would bite your hand off for a 12th place finish, but for Chelsea it's shocking. The signings they brought in the summer did not perform as well as expected. Sterling, he was decent. Cucurella was dreadful. Oh my god. Koulibaly, he was okay. But yeah, Todd Boehly took over and they spent a huge amount in the winter window. I think it was like 600 million or something. And while those signings did perform better than the ones they bought in the summer, it was not enough for the Blues, who slid into a bottom half finish. Now I do think they have a brilliant side with Pochettino due to come in. He might have already been appointed by the time you see this video. They're definitely going to kick on next season. But for this season, it was managerial carousel with Tuchel being sacked in September, with Potter coming in as his replacement. Didn't get well with him either. And he was let go with Lampard being brought in to see out the season, and as you could guess, or as you probably know, didn't go well for Frank either. Overall, it was a dreadful season from Chelsea, but hey, I said they wouldn't secure Champions League football, and I was correct. And then in the Champions League spots and in 4th place, I had Arsenal. They actually finished 2nd. Arsenal really defied expectations this season. I did think they would qualify for the Champions League, but did not expect them to really challenge City for the title like they did. Ultimately, they did bottle it, but they exceeded expectations, especially based on last season where they came 5th or something. So yeah, it's a very, very big jump from Arsenal. I did see them doing very well this season, but I focused on the wrong signings. You know, Jesus and Zinchenko were the ones I really focused on during my initial predictions. And while Jesus did perform quite well and Zinchenko did too, it was really Odegaard and Martinelli who were the ones I should have focused on, because they were great additions and really propelled Arsenal forward, as well as Saliba as well. You know, bringing him back and actually putting him in the side. He was a stalwart in defence, and their performances really dropped when he was not in the side. So it shows Arsenal were right to stick with Arteta and his project, and while that is still going, it still has a long way to go. It was very impressive from the Gunners nonetheless, and yeah, they should be proud for challenging City like they did. And then in 3rd place I had Tottenham Hotspur, who finished in 8th. Tottenham backed Conte in the summer window, and on paper that Spurs side looked very formidable. But fast forward to the end of the season and it's like, what happened? What went wrong? Despite being a serial winner, Conte could not change Spurs' fortunes, and eventually he left the club. Stellini then took charge, but only lasted a month before Ryan Mason took over from him. Now, it wasn't a great season from Spurs. They missed out on European football, and any trophies they could have won, they were knocked out pretty early. But Kane was really the catalyst for the Spurs side, and he carried them. You know, I think he scored 30 goals. And for this dreadful Spurs side, that is actually quite impressive. Very awful season by their standards. They did not cook. I don't even know who their manager is going to be next season. They haven't brought in anyone of note as of yet. So, yeah. But for this season, didn't go well for Tottenham. Not in the slightest. But they did better than Chelsea, which is an achievement, I guess. Then we move on to 2nd place, and I had Liverpool, who actually finished in 5th. Now, Liverpool had a shocker. I think everyone expected them to continue challenging Manchester City, but that was just not the case this season. They did make some good signings, to be fair, but I don't think they fully filled that gap left by Mane. Liverpool slipped out of Champions League contention and it actually looked like they would miss out on European football altogether at one point this season. You know, I'm sure I said in some of my Premier League predictions that, you know, they might actually miss out on Europe. But Klopp worked his magic and dragged them up to 5th place. Now, they were hampered by injuries quite a lot this season, as were Chelsea, as were Nottingham Forest. But when their players started coming back, you really did see an uptick in their form. So, yeah, really it was injuries that fucked Liverpool more than Mane leaving, I think. But yeah, not a great season by Liverpool standards, and very unexpected too, but I'm sure we'll see him kick on next season. And finally, in 1st place, I had Manchester City. And I was correct. Nailed this one as well. But I think everyone did. Although they were challenged by Arsenal, I don't think this result was ever in doubt. They did some great business, but the stand-up player is obviously Haaland. You know, in his first season, the 22-year-old scored 36 league goals. There were moments where City stumbled, but for the most part they were dominant, going on a 12-match winning streak en route to winning the title. That is unbelievable form, and that is title-winning form, to be honest. But yeah, City were amazing this season. Haaland, Alvarez, both brilliant introductions to the squad. I think Alvarez was signed last season, but you know, that's neither here nor there. He was brilliant as well. And they're also on track to do a treble, which would be insane. What a season it's been for City, and yeah, they made the Premier League look like a farmers' league at some points, but they weren't on top for most of it, to be fair. So really, they actually came from behind to beat Arsenal and win the title in a way, even though no one really expected Arsenal to win it, if you know what I'm saying. But yeah, I always backed Manchester City to win the league, and they did, but I think it's kind of a free hit, to be honest. So yep, that's been my look back at how I thought the Premier League would go this season. I don't think I did too bad, to be fair. You know, I got some predictions nailed on, you know, Leeds, Wolves, Manchester City, and I got some close like Nottingham Forest, Crystal Palace. So yeah, I think I did fairly well, to be honest. Obviously, didn't get it spot on, but I don't think anyone can get the Premier League spot on. But for my first attempt, I'm happy with that. So yeah, I've been O2GT. Hope you have enjoyed the video. I've got some good ideas planned for the off season, so I hope you're looking forward to those. Please like and subscribe, and I shall see you guys in the next video. Peace.